Welcome to Marketo APIs, 3 easy ways to activate your data. We're joined today by special guest Corey Bayless, Director from Prudential Financial, and I'm your host, Lauren McCormack, with Lucas Machado on our AI and automation team. And just to let you know, a little bit of housekeeping up front. Recordings are going to be shared, of course, after the event via email to the email that you use to register. If you do not consent to a live recording, perhaps you'll want to wait for the recording to be distributed to you. Otherwise, we will proceed with the recording. And during the session, if you're going to ask questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We would love the engagement. Our panelists love to answer questions, and participation is strongly encouraged, but feel free to drop them in the chat. We will get to them at the end. We have a special section of time dedicated to Q&A. So here's our agenda for the day. We're going to go through a brief introduction of your panelists and hosts. We're going to dip into some API fundamentals. Then we have live use cases that you get to enjoy. We're going to give you some tips and tricks on how to get started with implementing some of the tips that we're sharing today. And we're going to save some time for you to ask any questions you might have of our panelists. That being said, let's get the introduction underway. I'm Lauren. I'm a VP here at Revenue Pulse, 4-time Marketo champ. I've also founded and lead the Tucson Marketo user group. I am OG. I go all the way back to 2012, 2013 timeframe with Marketo. I attended the first Marketo Summit that was open to the broader public, and I was one of the first 200 people ever to be Marketo certified. I'm now, I think, at my 7th certification. I help write the questions for the exams now, and kind of just enjoy taking them for, I think, the merit badges at this point. But in my free time, you'll likely find me at the gym. I like to teach yoga and group fitness, as well as dance fitness. And I'm proud to help steer the curriculum for digital marketing for the University of California, Chico. Corey Bayless, one of our esteemed guests today. Would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That's a tough to follow up because I don't have I'm not teaching my Marketo skills at a university. That's really cool. And I actually don't know if I knew that. So amazing stuff. Yeah, my name's Corey Bayless. I am a director, product owner at Prudential Financial. I'm a 5-time Marketo champion. Cloud expert, 9-year programmer, and I've had about 12 to 13 years with enterprise Marketo, with Microsoft, Expedia, AWS, and Amazon. And I'm also a glorified bird owner with a 28-year-old parrot. So yeah, I do a lot of different things across the board with Marketo. Feel real confident, love the UI. Everyone has something to say about the UI, but it's where I live and breathe and die. And so definitely excited to share some of my insights with some of the experiences that I've had with needing the API, why you would need the API, and how you can up-level your career. So hopefully you all can take some really good tips and tricks into your job and what you're trying to do. And I'll pass it over to Lucas. Thanks, everyone.
Corey, just to clarify, I'm not quite as fancy as you might think. I don't teach yet. One day I hope to, but I do help steer the curriculum. So
Okay.
that's one of those goals I haven't quite yet attained. But if anybody listening in the audience wants to connect me with some sort of adjunct teaching night gig, I am so down with that. Also a bird owner here too. Mine is 22. So maybe we found the Marketo Champ Senior Bird Society or something. I don't know. But that being said, a newly minted champ. Proud to pass the mic on over to Lucas.
Thank you, Lauren. And well, it's even harder to follow both of you because I'm a rookie here as a newly named Marketo champ for the first time. And as a random curiosity that I just realized, my father-in-law also has a parrot. So I think it is something. You have to be around a parrot to go to the champs. But random curiosity too, it's a female parrot, so it doesn't really talk back. It just like learns. Just male parrots can talk back, right? But Other things about me, I'm the director of AI and automation in Revenue Pulse. I actually did my first API call in Marketo before I sent my first email, which is kind of hard to believe, but was my track record there. And I think that comes much of being graduated in applied and computational mathematics and coming from this technical and data background and not marketing. So this makes me much more comfortable playing with the data, with the technology, and pushing the limits there. I'm also Brazilian, and I call myself a stereotypical Brazilian because I love football, I love samba. For a matter of fact, last night I was watching a game until late night because I just can't not watch it. And I'm also a proud vegetarian, been for 9, almost 10 years now. And nice to meet you all.
Fabulous. So you've got 3 times the champ power today behind this presentation. But that being said, let's get to the good stuff and dive right into API fundamentals.
All right, all right. And I think the first question that comes to mind when someone hears API for the first time is, what is an API? And this is not an API introduction class, so we won't be taking too much time into this. I think most of our audience, if maybe even all our audience, are already seasoned professionals that have had contact with the API one way or another. But the technical definition of API is an application programming interface, which is not a great name. That doesn't say that much. But when it comes to Marketo, I like to think it of a way of using Marketo without being in the platform. It's a way you can interact with the programs, the data, and everything without being there. And it makes it very, very powerful, and we're going to talk about that because then you can use code to amplify your powers. The power that you have in the platform is defined by how fast you can click on things and type things. In code, you can do things very repetitive tasks and very powerful tasks. But the Marketo API basically defines the ways that you can talk to the application using the code. So it limits, it sets guidelines, it sets rules that allows you to talk with the platform in specific ways. So that being said, why should you care about the API? And this is a question that I'm going to ask for Corey, actually, because he's been using the API for more than 9 years, right?
Uh, yeah, various different APIs, many different ones, but Marketo definitely very heavily. Yeah, I think the funny thing about APIs is it's actually just a port and a server that allows you to make a direct connection into a SaaS product that's online. It's basically how the online world connects to various different applications. So it's how an application would talk to another application. It's the foundations of how that all functions. The reason why you should care about the API is because the biggest issues that most companies face is going to revolve around how I can't do certain things inside the box of Marketo. I can't. I'm stuck in this manual processes where I always have to like upload lists, or I have to take data from a third party and then I have to manually, manicure that data and put it into Marketo, right? So what ends up happening to a MOPS practitioner, especially when you start getting to the really advanced stages, is these manual tasks start to build up. They build up day in and day out. And so every day, if you don't have the ability to automate your workflows and automate the data intake that's coming into your system to basically stay at pace with business rules, different other types of tech requirements, all of these things start to stack up. And what ends up happening as a MOP practitioner is if you don't know how to automate yourself out of that manual stack, you basically run out of time, and you max out your abilities and your capabilities in the system to be able to handle certain workflows. And so that's where your advanced knowledge of Marketo or whatever market automation service you're working on, the API comes in and it can really relieve a lot of that pain. For me, I am basically, over my 12, 13 years of using the tool, highly allergic to manual work. I do everything I can to get away from it because that manual repetitive task is actually really, really difficult to maintain at pace. If you have to constantly be surrounded by, I have all of these things that I need to do at the start of my day, but you're in meetings all day long, especially at a leadership position like a director, senior director, or a VP, you can't keep up with it. It becomes a very big problem for the business because you are just overwhelmed. Another issue that you run into is that it's not cost efficient. So if my salary is much higher than what I'm able to actually manually produce, and as Lucas alluded to, click a mouse, I'm all of a sudden at a deficit for the business, and I'm not actually able to produce enough to have the return on investment that's required to own a system like Marketo or any other marketing automation system, because they're all very, very expensive. And trust me, with the rise of costs and everything, this stuff isn't going to get cheaper. It's only going to get more expensive. So if you are an advanced practitioner, I highly, highly recommend that you start looking into how you can utilize the API and the various other things that it can do to solve your various workflows. I have a lot more information to add on top of that, but for right now, that is why you should care. Back to you, Lucas.
Thank you, Corey. And I think that's a very better explanation than this slide. That basically API is an enabler, much more passionate way of describing it. But in the end, that's it. That the API is going to save you time by making tasks much easier. And some tasks that are even virtually impossible because your day in the end of the day just has 24 hours and you can't work more than 16 usually because you have to sleep the rest of them.
16 hours. No, that is called burnout pace. Let me
exactly.
allude to like what that looks like when you're at scale, at enterprise scale. So when I was at AWS, I used this analogy to kind of make a reference of like, think of it as like you have this backpack of stuff that you have to do on a daily basis, right? And so think of if I have 30 hours of work that I have to do for this particular thing, and I can't automate that, along with all of your email campaigns, along with all the compliance framework and management that you need to do as a central team, you also have to kind of strung along this 30-hour workflow that you need to also take care of in order to stay functionally at the speed of business, right? And so when you look at mass approving landing pages, let me just give you an idea of what that looks like. At AWS, we had 32 workspaces. We had a massive amount of stuff that we had to manage. I had 36,000 workspaces or 36,000 landing pages across 32 workspaces that I had to manage, and I had to manage the code for GDPR as well as cookie compliance, right? That is 30,000 things, 35,000 things that I can actually click on in Marketo. I wish I was kidding. I'm not kidding. It is absolutely insane when you think about it. When you're at that scale, you actually can't make an impact on the system by manually doing work. You have to automate that work. And the best part is when you do automate it, you get to sit back and you get to read a book while everything gets updated exactly as your code depicts. So another big reason of why the API is an enabler and why it's so important, because it's not just mass approving things. It's not just managing your resources. It's also data management. It's also deduplication. It's all the things that you need to pay attention to as you continue to up-level your career and you start going into that medium, large size to enterprise level Marketo instances. All of these things are critical at runtime. And as an advanced practitioner and people who are moving into those next stages, again, highly, highly recommend that you understand how these things work. And if you can't yourself do those things, at least you can explain them to a developer so a developer can explore those things. So if I don't know how to do these advanced things, but Lucas knows how to do it, but I know how to explain it in a way that a developer understands, that's also just as critical. Would you agree, Lucas?
I definitely would agree because not everyone is going to be a code master, and sometimes you just have to know what you can and can't do using the tools that you have and ask some help. But I hope everyone got super enticed and excited to learn a little things about the API today. Now we're going to get a little bit on the Marketo API basics, and we're going to talk more about where to start and a deeper explanation in the end. But here is just a first knowledge that the Marketo API has. It's basically divided in four. Two of them are the most important ones. Two others are not very important, but still essential. The Marketo identity one is just, it's like the login page for the APIs where you get your access token. This means that you're probably going to use it once for every call that you make, but it's going to be repeated every single time. The Marketo assets is where you programmatically interact with your assets, like landing pages. So the example that Corey said, mass approving landing pages, that would be done by Marketo assets endpoints. Or for example, you want to add a field in all the forms that you have, you would do that through the Marketo assets endpoints. Marketo leads, that's where you get to data management. So there's where you can interact with your leads, extract activity log, update them. And you can also use the Marketo user management, although this is less common, to create, update, or delete Marketo users there. But I use this very little throughout my career, to be honest. The assets and leads one are the most common, and the identity is something that you're always going to use, no matter what, every day, probably.
So I would say Marketo user management is really useful, but at scale. So let me explain why. And I'm going to use AWS as my primary because Prudential's system is not quite to that robust level that AWS was at. But we had over 2,500 users in our user management service, our system. And basically to create a user through the UI, it took 15 minutes per user. So you would be sitting there as Marketo would cycle through and say, okay, I'm building the user. I'm building the user. I'm building the user. And now imagine if you had an onboarding process where you had to onboard, 30 new people in a day or two, right? Now equate that out, right? If that's 15 minutes per users, guess what? You are running that update while you're also doing everything else. So you're like updating the person, letting Marketo do its loading, and then you go to another task, and then you come back, and then you go to another task. I have a horror story at Microsoft. I had to delete 600 users, and it took me 3 weeks to do it. Right? So user management API is a fantastic way to solve for that. Very rare that a lot of companies will be to that level. But once you get to a point where it starts maxing out, it takes forever to run that processing. So you really, really, really want to take control of that with the Marketo user management tool. Great Postman libraries out there that can help you do that. Another one, the Marketo leads. Why is the Marketo leads API so important? So when you're uploading data into Marketo or you're trying to create targeting, let's say you have 1 million records, right? You have 1 million records that you individually want to target, but you have to get that data into Marketo. A smart list isn't going to cut it. You can do 1,500 to about 2,000 emails per smart list or per filter in a smart list. So imagine if you had 1 million records, equate out how many smart list filters you'd have in order to hit that 1 million record. If you have the API, you can inject that data directly into a static list and make reference directly to that static list using the API. So when you have bulk enablement and bulk management, the Marketo API for leads, that's a great way to kind of think of like, okay, if I need to handle 2 million records and I need to be very specific to those 2 million records and I can't do a list import because that, is pretty much very much outside of the expansiveness that Marketo can handle. It can handle it. It just takes a long time. The API is a great way to fast pace that process. Reason why you would want to use the API is backend and it doesn't rely on the Java that lives in the Marketo system to have to process that data from a UX perspective. It actually just works behind the scenes and it's a significantly more efficient than if you were to use the UI.
Perfect. Thank you for the addition there, Corey. And with that, we are going to the juicy part, to the use cases themselves. And the first one, and they are going to scale in complexity. So the first one, although it's simple, it's very powerful. It's to extract the activity log from leads, because you can extract individual activity logs from Marketo UI, but you cannot extract the bulk ones. And why would you want to extract the bulk activity logs? For many different reasons. For example, analyzing email data, for understanding what happened just before an opportunity is created in a lead, in a mass scale, like understand what was like the last touch point before an opportunity is created. That's something that you can do, extracting the activity logs from your whole database. And if you extract it individually, that's even how it looks. It doesn't even have all the data that you can have if you do it via the API. So basically, the UI has a lot of limitations. So individual export only, limited information on export, and this in the end can lead to error on reporting. And if you want to do all these cool use cases like create a dashboard for email activities, analyze which steps the lead usually takes before MQL or before an opportunity is created, or even understand when your database usually opens email, what time of the day, then you need to extract the activity log from multiple leads, and this is virtually impossible doing with the Marketo UI. So basically, any data analysis that you want to do in activity, you have to export this data. And here are the steps with the API that you have to follow. First, you have to get the access token, then the paging token, finally get the activities and save to an Excel file, and we'll do that right now. So here's the code. I'm not going to explain it too much, but first we get the access token, as I said, then the paging token, the email activities, and save to an Excel. And when it is over, it's going to print here that it was saved. And I'm extracting all the email information from the last 2 years from a sandbox instance. So there's not going to be a lot. That's why it was super quick. If you're exporting data from the last 2 years of a big instance, that would take too much time. And let me get this file, email activities, that was saved. And here you go. So as you can see, you have your lead ID here for every activity. This is the only identifier that we have. Oh, sorry, this is activity ID. Sorry, this is the lead ID itself. Every activity has its ID. The lead ID here is the only lead identifier that we have. When this activity happened, the activity date. This is always in UTC unless you program the API to call it in a different time zone. The activity type ID, 6 being email sent, 7 delivered, 10 open, and 11 clicked. The Smart Campaign ID that was responsible, and well, many other attributes that you can see here that it can be pretty cool and pretty useful if you investigate them deeper, like bot activity pattern that you can see in email opens and email clicks, and many others. But with that, Corey, why would you use something like that? I know
Okay,
that you're
so
eager to talk.
no, I cannot begin to tell you how important this is. There are things in Marketo that you cannot capture error codes on. You can do it with webhooks. They do have drop downs. You can filter by that, but it's really, really, really difficult for other things to be able to see when there's failures that happen. Failure scenarios is one of the weakest points in my mind for Marketo. Error handling is like quintessential programming 101. You always build with the idea that things will fail. And you always build with the idea that you can capture the analytics to be able to capture the things that fail that allow you to dive into the specific details of those things. You should actually keep that up if you can, Lucas. There's some really good data in here that I want expert practitioners to pay attention to. But with that being said, the bot activity is a great example. There is metadata that's contained in the activity that you cannot extract out of a smart list, but you can pull it into a CSV. You can organize it with a little bit of manual work, and you can create really good routing. Tyron is a great example of how he uses this data in ChatGPT to be able to organize send times of what is the most optimal way that you can actually send an email or time that you can send an email, as an example, right? But a couple of things that expert practitioners want to pay attention to is the activity type ID. Every single activity that happens in Marketo has a specific ID to it. When you start getting into advanced use cases, being able to tell the developer which ID they care about basically streamline the efficiency of the conversation in a very, very dramatic way, because there's so many different types that you can actually look at. So getting familiar with the activity type ID is super important. Now, what does that bring up for a lot of people? How do I know what the activity type ID is? Great question. You can't get that information unless you use the API for the activity extraction, right? So many common things that you're like, oh man, I wish that I could capture that ID type, or maybe you can in like extracting it out of the activity log. That could also be a way to do it, but think of it as a one by one. You have to click into each activity. And if you're looking at it from a scaled percentage of like, if you have 1 million people you have to look through, I can't click activity on 1 million people, right? But what if I wanted to see 1 million people and I had the activity? Guess what? I can organize everybody by activity 6. Now, all of a sudden, I can actually see very clearly how many people took that particular action and how it was recorded on the log. So again, this one, super important. Postman is a great way to do it. Lucas also has amazing code that he just showed that will allow us to sort of accomplish this particular task. But if you're going into your expert level practitioner for Marketo, this is something that you should pay attention to. And I desperately want Lucas to post more information about this in the Champ blog so that we can go into it in a further details so that the people who need to know it can learn it. Because it's not straightforward. It's actually quite complicated to do this, but the information that you can pull from it is paramount for being able to do high level execution on whatever your use case or requirement is. Excellent work, Lucas. Really, really good stuff.
Thank you, Corey. And fun fact, this was actually really my first API call, so I highly recommend you start doing this. It was a project to build an email dashboard from a client in AWS. So we had to get all the activity details there and treat that. And well, that was my first Marketo project ever. And it is a fun to build. As we said, this is the end result that you get in the end. And now let's go to a few more complicated. And this one, I think, is going to resonate with a lot of people because it's about reverting data changes. And imagine yourself in the following scenario. You received a message from a marketing manager, a field marketer, saying that there was an event that happened, and it's very important for the SDRs that the list is uploaded as soon as you can. Yesterday, it's already late, but your plate is full. It's one of those days that you have a lot to do. You didn't automate a lot of your tasks, so you have a lot of manual tasks to do, and this is one of them, so you're just running through them. So you get the list and you upload it, and a few minutes later you get messages from SDR saying that they received weird leads, that they have weird data, and you realize that the list was poorly formatted or had wrong data. For example, you could have the company as job title and job title as company, and people are getting frustrated with this. And this is your reaction, right? Like you just panic extremely because you don't know how to fix it. There are leads that were existing in your database for years. They came from different sources. How do I get to the real job title? How do I fix that? The API can help you there. So you start with the last use case that we had. You get the data value changes activities. So we were talking about email activities, but you can do the same process for the data value changes activities. And you get from that the new value and old value. And you can pick the old value and update them via the API. So that's what we're going to do right now. No, this is not the right tab. This is the right tab. So first, let's go into Marketo itself. Oh. Of course, it would log off just in the moment. While I'm logging in, Corey, can you remember a moment that you had to go through this?
Daily. when Marketo needs to function and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
way too many times to count.
When you have an audience, right? That's when Marketo knows to misbehave.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, to just reiterate, right, what he was saying is that activity log extraction allows you to pull previous value and new value, right? Think of how important it is if you have those data values that are updating incorrectly. how important it would be to be able to see that and be able to say holistically what happened. And now instead of having to go lead by lead, I can actually look specifically into that activity log in a CSV format that allows me to really organize it. But let's see the magic.
All right. Here is the right lead, just like random names and values. What I'm basically going to do is import a list that for every lead 89 has the job title 90, for the lead 90 has the job title 91, and this logic. So this is going to be the wrong list, per se.
No, don't do it. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we have to go there. We have to
No,
go
don't
there.
do it. Don't do it. It's painful to watch. Just kidding.
It is. It definitely is. It
No,
is.
If
I-
anybody who's done
Go
this for a
here.
long time, you know you've run into this. You
Mhm.
know you're just like, oh my God, how do I solve this problem? Here you go.
As a disclaimer, no actual databases are harmed in the making of this webinar.
We are database friendly here. So let's just finish the listing part. And in the end of this webinar, you won't even be doing listing parts anymore, but just for the sake of the knowledge. So it is important. It will take a while, but in the end, our leads will show right here. And I like to call this use case actually time machine, because it's fun. But it has imported now. Oh, right, updating the view. All right, so you can see here you have the lead 89, job title 90. So this is panic mode. You have to correct it pretty fast. And this is the code to do it. So first you get the access token, as always. You set up the date that you want to restore to. So earlier today, basically. The field, the regular name is job title, but the API name is just title. And you can find this in the admin section. And the list ID 298. Here's, 299 actually.
299.
Here's where you can find it. Yeah, they have the same leads. I just re-uploaded them, but the right one's 299. You get your paging token, and then you get your activities. And let's do 298 just for sake of it. Of course, it would break now. Let me just find where is breaking. Oh, it's breaking the beginning, the first API call. Weird. Right here. You're saying has no more results. More results. There is no result here. Okay, now it ran. Don't know why. But it worked in the end. No changes at all. And what I like to do from this, yeah. Here's our data frame. And what we have here in the end is the job titles that were changed. And we want to extract this old value from it. Sorry for this.
This is called battling code.
Oh,
Anybody who gets into the
right.
API, you have to be able to handle errors. You have to know your code and why you're doing it. So that's why just pasting code for people to copy and paste doesn't
Never
work.
work.
You have to get good at understanding how this stuff functions. If you're really trying to up-level your career, trust me when I say this, it is so important to go from the beginning steps to the advanced steps. You can't just jump hurdles, because the second that something breaks, you have no idea how to troubleshoot it. You have no idea how to actually extract what you're trying to do. What Lucas is doing here is he's pulling down the file and basically creating a data frame in Jupyter, which is it's a construct of Jupyter, and you're able to do it in real time. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but he's capturing the old values, pulling them specifically out, synthesizing them down to only the value, and then replacing it with the new value so that you can refactor it back to the original source or the original value.
And the error that I was throwing is, for some reason, there was another column here in the JSON that I wasn't expecting in the original code. I called it other. Most of them are empty, but we're probably going to see some field values here when I put that in an Excel spreadsheet. After I treat this data and get here, you can see like we have, in the end, the things that we mostly want is the lead ID and the old value, the value that it existed before the listing port. What I like to do from that is send it to a spreadsheet, because from the spreadsheet you can share with other people that really want to see this and want to confirm if the data is correct. Let's just open it. Here we go. So here we have your job title, your old value. This is the thing that you're going to be using, and here is the value that was replaced instead. So you can share something like this with SDRs, make it just prettier a little bit so they can understand it, and confirm, okay, it's the old value, the correct value is the one that should be in the job title itself. If you get an affirmative answer, then what you have to do is use the API to re-import it. That's what we're doing here. And it happened. So if we go back to Marketo and refresh the page, you can see now that the 89 has the 89 title, the 90 has the 90 title, and here you go.
That was savage. That was so savage. Nicely done. Nicely done.
And I love that we have a moment to see code breaking in front of us. It
Yeah,
always happens.
Every good film has to have a moment of suspense, right?
Yep.
Okay. So there you go.
Now getting to the other use case, this is one of my favorites, to be honest, because working in your early days with Marketo, you start to feel that it's great at scaling comparing to other MOPS tools with templates, with tokens, but you still have a lot of manual work. Like you still have to clone the programs, you still have to paste the tokens in the right place, update smart campaigns, and activate them. So it's a lot of manual work. And if you're running an instance that has like 10 campaigns per day, it's already challenging. If it has 1,000 campaigns per day, then it's basically impossible to keep track of everything that is happening, to ensure consistency that is being created correctly. Even if you have an amazing team, it scales too quickly. And well, I'm very lazy. I think Corey shares that feeling. Like when you see like, oh, you have to create 40, 50 webinars, I just don't want to. And I'm like, there must be a better way to do this. And there is.
If you want carpal tunnel, manual processing like this is a great way to achieve that goal.
Yeah, definitely. You can use the API to clone these programs, update the tokens, and activate the smart campaigns. But with these great powers also comes great responsibility, right, Corey?
Yes, Lucas. Yes, it is. Technical debt is something that I hate passionately, but also with the API, you yourself can create tremendous amounts of technical debt. So what do we mean by that? When you get really good at being able to clone and build things, it's also really important to be able to remove those things. So when you clone 50 programs, also have your ability to delete those 50 programs. And here's one thing while he's loading that up. One thing that's really important to take into consideration is that Marketo doesn't follow your typical dev process. You usually would see people build things in a lower environment, in like a beta or a gamma, right, where they can test everything and make sure it all works. In Marketo, you can actually test it in prod and see what your results are actually going to be, and not have a big impact on everything, right? So it kind of follows this other functional way of working, that's really important to kind of understand. Like if I'm going to update my landing pages, right? I can use the API to say, approve this landing page. And then I can go in and I can say, did it do the thing that I wanted it to do? Did I put the changes in place that I wanted to put in place? And when I approved it, right, did it follow the way that I wanted it to go? And if your answer is no, then bulk approving the next 100 pages is probably not the direction. So you kind of want to go back and you're like, okay, well, what broke on the first thing, fix the thing that broke on the first thing, and then retest it and make sure it's all in a good spot, right? We don't want to create more technical debt. And you definitely don't want to create technical debt that you can't automate. So you also got to be really careful with that. Anyway, keep going, Lucas. Good stuff.
All right. So let's say you have 25 webinars that you have to create and fill those tokens with the date, the name, the date, time, the duration, and approve all the smart campaigns and receive the spreadsheet, and you have to do this. So let's go to our Marketo instance. Here you have your template, and here is where all the programs would live. So what you do here is first always get the access program token, and then the order is you're going to clone your program, search smart campaigns, activate them, create the token text tokens, and create the date tokens. This is all the code there. But to start, we read this spreadsheet. It's here in Jupyter, the same spreadsheet that I just showed you guys, and we run through it, creating all our programs. And while it is running the code here, what I'm going to show is, okay, the first one's already created here. And you can see the smart campaigns activating. And the tokens are going to be filled. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong folder here. The tokens are going to be filled, are already filled actually.
There's the next one. That next program just cloned. Yep.
Yeah. And this keeps going until the 25. And you can see here, actually, I even created one email that you can see it. It populates immediately because you have tokens. So the email is ready. The smart campaigns are activated. Then it's just a quick review and it's ready to launch. So while we create the 25 here, oh, sorry, it's removed. Oh, see, webinar test one is in one day. It's webinar details, all of that. It's all created and activated automatically.
Lucas, did I mention how excited I am that you're a Marketo champion and how much this warms my heart that you are able to do all of this?
Yeah, it's a pretty fun use case, right?
It's great. I wanted to add one thing though, is that if you do have issues with standardization, for instance, you can't add filters to a smart list. You can't change values on a smart campaign. So while we did clone, 25 programs, if the smart list were to change, based on each program, you do individually have to go in and make those changes. But guess what? You don't have to click clone each program every single time. All those programs are there. You're probably reducing 80% of the amount of manual clicks that you have to do there to get that done. It's really, as if you want to really be that next level practitioner, right? How do you incorporate daily API usage within your daily tasks? Lucas is literally putting that on full display right now. This is the most advanced things that you can do to up-level your Marketo. As soon as somebody sees that they can do this in Marketo, you will get any job that you want. Any job. Like anybody will hire you.
The core guarantee.
It's literally like there's very few people who can do this stuff. So if you learn these things, I promise you it will be so beneficial to your career. I am a working example of that. What I had to solve at AWS with the team that I had versus the amount of technical debt that we had to deal with, I would have been crushed had I not been able to explore and understand all of the vast abilities that you can do with the API. And Lucas is putting on just some of the things that I had to do there, and he's really putting it on display. So well done, sir. Let's talk about deduplication.
Let's go to deduplication, because this is a problem that I think every Marketo instance face. You can get a lot of duplicates pretty fast coming from manual lead creation, CRM syncs, some API requests, even with no lookup field established, will lead to duplicates. And fixing it manually, I would say it's virtually impossible, because it takes forever. It definitely takes forever. And the API is a great resourceful way for you to merge duplicates, because you can create the duplication rules. There are some rules that comes directly from the API. So for example, every field from the winner lead is going to be incorporated unless it's a Boolean field. Then if there is a true, it's going to be that true value. But you can use a few rules to help you there, especially if you want to preserve, for example, paid media as an event source, as a lead source, because, well, you want that in your attribution system because you want to show how many leads came from paid media, even though it's a duplicate. And then finally, you can match the duplicate and update your winning leads with your deduplication rules. But more than saying, let's go there and do it. So close this, and go to deduplication. I created a list here of duplicates, but you could go to the system smart list to get all your duplicates. And here on the leads, you can see we have many of them, but let's focus on this 5 here. You can see that it has one unsubscribed. This unsubscribed has to remain true when it's merged. But I think the most curious one should look into is the dedup one, because the rule that I defined is that the oldest lead is going to win. So basically this lead. But since this one has an unsubscribed equal to true, the final lead has to have this unsubscribed equal to true. And because this lead source is paid media, I want to update the winner to also have lead source as paid media. So let's go to it. And the first thing you have to do is to export this list. So you can reference it later.
Good backup technique, right? Before we dedupe, we always want to have the ability to see what we're deduping against. So we always have reference in case something does go wrong. Always back up your data.
Absolutely.
Lucas, I have 4 million duplicates. Can you help me?
Of course. Give me a call after this and we can look into it. All right. We exported it. Let's download. Take over. All right. And here, start again. Get access token. Created the duplicate function and the update lead function. Read the spreadsheet. Let me just show how it looks here. So you have here all your data, all the leads that you want to duplicate, the same thing as you have in the smart list, in the static list in this case. And now we're going to run it and update and deduplicate and update all our leads. So one was duplicated and it was updated. Let me refresh it. You can see we had 23, now we have 18. And while the API is running, this is going to finish. Corey, can you bring more on the value of having a deduplication tool and technique here while the API is running?
I mean, you already covered it, right? One at a time. So let's say if I had 4 million leads, I have one at a time. So I'm going, okay, 4 million leads. All right. 3,999,000, 398,000, 397,000, right? So, or 3,000,009. Sorry, I'm not even, the numbers are too big. I can't even consciously, you're the math whiz, right? So you get the idea. But if you
Yeah.
were to use Adobe's tool, also not cheap, right? So if you're on a budget, I would honestly, like, I would hire Revenue Pulse to help me do this, because I know that I'm confident in what they're doing. But another thing that's also very difficult here is being able to determine sometimes what your parent is that you're deduping into, right? So a big thing is you really want to avoid data loss. And that's what makes the deduplication conversation so difficult to handle, especially when it starts getting into that scale. So what you're showing here is just foundational for people to understand the mess that duplicates create in Marketo, but here's a really great way that you can help fix that issue, and why people should hire Revenue Pulse and go to you so that you can help them solve this problem. And it helps people really clean up their database. One, it allows you to start getting to the golden record, which is the record that has all the things that you want on it, and sales is communicating directly with that rather than it being two separate objects. I mean, the list literally goes on what you're trying to do. So please continue wowing me and everyone who's in this webinar.
Right. I think due to time, we'll just explain this one instead of showing, because we still have a few slides to cover. But data pipelines, what is this? We were mentioning before the problem that you might have by importing lists, and how it can be very hard to understand, to use smart lists sometimes even to segment your data, and you can import all the leads directly to a static list using the API, or you can even create workflows like a file is added to your Google Drive, Zapier will trigger a zap that will read that file and automatically import to an event list for the registration, for example. So this is the idea of data pipelines. You'll be able to get data from outside of Marketo and import that into static lists. Why is that useful, Corey?
Why is it useful? Because not all SaaS applications have a direct integration, code-free integration, right? So if Marketo doesn't integrate with a certain platform, like for instance, Oracle or Snowflake, right? How do I get data from Snowflake, my database, into Marketo without having to take on manual, terrible, disgusting work that has to happen on a daily basis to keep you at pace for your enterprise workflow? Oh, how do you do it? Pipelines. Pipelines are a great way to do it. My favorite connection, you ready for this? And it's so cheap. Snowflake, S3 Cloud, storage bucket. Think of S3 as like a folder that exists on your local that you store in a CSV in, and then directly into Lambda. And the code that Lucas has been using to re-import the data back into Marketo, that's what a pipeline is. It's basically saying, instead of using a manual list import, I just use code to import that CSV directly into my Marketo instance. And that code translates directly into a Lambda compute process, right? So, and why do I like Lambda? Lambda is so cheap. It's really, really cheap to run Lambda. And the more efficient that you become and understand how you can create these connections enables automated data flow. So if I can take data from a third party and I can port it over into my Marketo instance, and then I can get that into my CRM, and I don't have to lift a finger to do it, and it's all automated on the back end, guess what? You are creating significant efficiency that has significant return on investment, that allows for your market automation tool to be able to recount the ROI that's necessary to pay for it in the first place. So if you have a data team that understands these concepts, teach them about how you can use this to import your data and process it without actually having to do anything. That would be my number one reason for why it's important. Do you have
Perfect.
anything to add?
No, I think that's it. That's it. That's an easy way to add things to Marketo and to process your data and create new integrations. I think that's the most important thing. So with that, let's go to how can I begin, and promise to do it super quickly. First thing that you have to do is create your API user in Marketo. You have to create an API role in the admin tab using the permissions for access API. Then you have to create a new user, a new API user using those permissions that you created. and you set it as API only, and then you finally have to set up a custom launch point service, because from the launch point service, you then can get your client ID, client secret that we've been using to get the access token. So these are the steps to get there. After you have that, then comes the fun part, the code part. And I always recommend that you start with Postman, because Postman has a easy to understand interface. You can set up your URL, your requests, everything like in a table mode, and you don't have to go direct to Python or any other programming language. This helps you get started. Don't get me wrong, at some point to get the full benefits of the API, I think you should go to a programming language. But to begin, I think Postman is amazing. And it also gives you the code afterwards. So this is very helpful also for learning the beginning when you're transitioning out of Postman to the API. And finally, get comfortable with code. I think Python is the best for this, at least for data management. It's easy to learn, has many data packages. I like Anaconda because it comes with Python and many useful packages like pandas, requests, NumPy. Most of these we use today in the use cases. Get comfortable with how the Marketo API reference is structured. It changed recently and it got me pretty confused. So always go there and reread it. Learn from online resources. Revenue Post blog has many codes that I written. The Nation, the blog post, the community blog post from Marketo also has it. Tyron's course is also amazing to learn the Marketo API. And don't be afraid of code. It's always going to be there and something that you have to learn. Any other advice there, Corey, to start with coding?
Write your first call. Successfully writing your first call is the biggest first step that you can take. Everything that he said is absolutely true. Python is definitely the way to go. It's the least amount of syntax that you have to be successful. Start with Postman. Start wrapping your head around technical capabilities. I cannot begin to emphasize how great it is to develop that technical mindset. If you want to know how Lucas and I got to the positions that we got to, it's because of my desire to want to learn these technical things. And it also allows for me to bridge the gap between conversations with my developer teams to the business groups that rely on it. And that is like the best way to show your value to any organization. It's what I do for Prudential. It's what I did for AWS, and just continue to learn. Be a steward of wanting to push these things forward. And I know we're right at time. I know we have a lot of questions that people want, but these things are also very, very important for our industry. Being able to be advanced in these capabilities allows for this industry to continue to move forward. So I'm so, so grateful for what Lucas has shown here and how important this stuff is for you to up-level your career. I can't tell you how many times I get that from people. What do I need to do this? Learn technical things. This is what you need to do to get better at your job.
Guys, you dropped so many knowledge bombs on our audience today. This was a joy to sit and moderate the discussion. Would like to just address one quick question. Zoe asks for the dedupe API, can you schedule this to run, or do you need to fire the API off manually? Great question.
Yeah, you can schedule it to run. It just depends on the platform that you're using. If you're running from your own computer, then you usually have to just go there and run it, but you can schedule a Zap, a recipe, and Power Automate flow, or any other thing, or a Lambda function. You can schedule it to run specific time of the day. So you can do it in many different, even your Python code, you can make it wait until a certain hour of the day. Like a wait step on a smart campaign, you can do that with your code too, and like trigger it at noon, but make it wait until midnight to start running.
Fabulous. Wonderful answer. Wonderful session. Thank you both so much for this wonderful content. Thanks to everybody that joined. Please stay tuned for the recording. Feel free to add us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. And we'll see you again next time. Have a great afternoon. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.